Welcome to Stageworthy. I'm Phil Rickaby, the host of this podcast. This is episode 328. Stageworthy is a one-person operation, so not only do I perform the interviews, I also arrange the guests, I edit the show, I promote it, and I even created the music that's playing under what I'm saying now. I also shoulder all of the financial responsibilities for keeping the show going, all while giving you this show for free. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider supporting it. There's a few ways that you can help out. If you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can leave a 5-star rating. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can also leave a review. Those reviews and ratings help new people to find this show. If you want to keep up with what's going on with Stageworthy and all my other projects, you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to philrickaby.com/subscribe. And you can also leave a tip for the show by dropping some change in the virtual tip jar. I will put a link to that in the show notes, which you can find on the website or in your podcast app. But one of the most important things that you can do, even more important than rating or reviews or even financial support, is to share on social media. Even retweeting this episode helps. You can find Stageworthy on Twitter and Instagram at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website with the archive of all 328 episodes at StageworthyPodcast.com. And if you want to find me online, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Phil Rickaby, and as I mentioned, my website is philrickaby.com. My guest this week is playwright and educator Stephen Neer. Stephen joined me to talk about his new play Whale Fall at the 2022 Hamilton Fringe, July 20th to 31st. Here's our conversation. I want to get talking about Whale Fall at the Hamilton Fringe, and I know it's a BYOV with the Hamilton Conservatory for the Arts.
Yeah.
Tell me about Whale Fall first.
So Whale Fall was a play that I started writing when I was associated with Theatre Aquarius. Part of their what they called their Junction, their Theatre Aquarius Junction, which was basically this program where they brought in creators who were actors, who were playwrights, who were whatever, who maybe had an idea and just weren't sure where to go with it. Was it a play? Was it a performance piece? What have you? And I approached Luke Brown, who was their director of new play development at the time, and said, I got this piece, and I don't know. It doesn't really feel like a play right now. I don't know what it is. But I'm my daughter, who is who was younger than she is now at the time, has this big fascination with marine mammals, and particularly orca and sharks and all that other stuff. And I really felt compelled to write a play about it, or write something about it. And I didn't know what to make of it. But I just really felt compelled to write about it. So I started working on it in the Junction. And essentially it just started out as a bunch of monologues, right? A bunch of monologues about, sharks and orcas and whales and all that stuff. And over time, it kind of took on a shape wherein the narrative was essentially like my daughter as a character in the play, and me as a character in the play talking to her about whales. And so I thought, is this like a storytelling exercise where we're sort of, I'm telling her stories about whales, and then she's sort of talking a little bit about them. And then I thought, but it needs more than that, right? And Luke, who was working as sort of a dramaturg, Gershot's dramaturg, was like, well, if this is to have a narrative, like, what does it look like narratively speaking? And I was like, yeah, it doesn't really have much of a narrative. Like, I don't know. It's just like monologues about whales. And that kind of got me thinking about, well, what does this look like from a storytelling perspective? What type of story am I telling? And it kind of brought me around to the notion that I was maybe telling a story about Becca reflecting back on a time when the orcas were still around, because she's living in a time when the orcas are extinct. And that was like, okay, so basically I'm projecting Rebecca, my daughter, into the future as, you know, a young woman who's been studying to be a marine biologist, being a whale biologist, but there are no whales. So what does that look like? What does a play like that look like? And then that led me to this pretty uncomfortable realization that in writing myself in this play, what role do I have in this play? Right? Like, what is my role in this play? Well, I kind of felt like, I guess my role is like, you know, then questioning, like, got to me questioning about the whole sort of overarching theme around the play, which is sort of my responsibility, my culpability to allowing species extinction, to allowing climate change, right? Which I think is the big question that is quite honestly facing so many creators nowadays. And it sort of dovetailed around the time, like around, I guess, 2020, because when we sort of all locked down, like 2020, the pandemic happened, and we all sort of locked down, but I kept on working on the piece, even though the junction was sort of meeting remotely. And around that time, there had been a lot of talk about, you know, what types of projects essentially do playwrights like me or creators like me, you know, older, white, male, middle class creators, what responsibility do we have in terms of writing? Like, what types of projects do we really have a right to put a voice to? You know, because there has been a lot of talk recently, and rightly so, about, you know, white male or white writers co-opting the stories of other cultures, right? Other cultural creators. But when I kind of came upon climate change, I kind of thought, well, this is honestly a subject that I can talk about. Why? Because, you know, white colonialist culture is something that we like, and that type of oppression, that type of change, that type of industrialization is something that, like, unfortunately, men like me have been very responsible for. And I kind of thought, well, maybe this is something that I can write about, that I can try and tackle, that I can talk about. You know, what responsibility do I have? What responsibility, what culpability do I have? How can I address this? How can I write about this thing, which is a really huge worry? And even back in like 2019, it was weighing upon us. But now in 2022, it's, you know, it's critical. Like, it's awful. The way that so much has been happening over these past few years, just pointing to some of the I guess some of the distressing news about climate change. And so this piece addresses that, but it addresses it in a very specific way. It addresses it in you know, by talking about this subject of species extinction. But one of the things I learned about when I was taking my master's was it's very difficult to write about climate change. It's very difficult to talk about things like extinction from an artistic standpoint, because a lot of times audiences kind of tune away from it, right? Or they'll only pay attention to it if it's, I don't know, in terms of I guess in a dystopian sense, right? Speculative fiction or whatever. So the way that I thought I could write about this is to make it very personal and to make it down to earth and make it very intimate. And really, there's nothing more intimate than, you know, the relationship between a father and a daughter, and the bond and the tension and the love between the two of them. And so that's kind of where this piece emerged, was addressing this very big issue from a very intimate, small issue, and trying to bridge that gap.
In terms of the writing of it, did the writing of it, was that a different process than one you normally follow?
Yeah, I was less interested in character dynamics, and less interested in sort of character backstory, like some of the world building that I usually do in a lot of my plays. I didn't do any of that. I did a lot of exploratory monologues. And when this is sort of the first time this piece has been performed live, like but we did a reading of it last year with the Hamilton Arts Week online. It was a digital presentation. So when I wrote the piece for that time frame, I really kind of said, okay, how do I basically inject a narrative in this? What is a narrative? What does the story look like? And what it turned into was it became a sort of a road trip, if you will. And so that the play kind of starts with this declaration, like right off the bat, making it clear to the audience, okay, the whales have disappeared. The whales are extinct. And so basically then the journey of Becca as the primary character is I need to like leave everything I'm doing right now to see if I can find them. And that kind of formed the backbone for the journey, if you will, of the play. But I didn't. So in that sense, what I did is I took a lot of the monologues that I had written and then kind of filled them in with, Becca on these certain points along the way, along this highway journey through BC, which was interesting because as I kind of took her on this journey through BC, there were all these other places for me to touch upon issues of environmentalism and climate change because, no surprise, BC has kind of been the epicenter for climate change disasters for the last few years. So I had a lot of material to kind of work with.
Now, the partnership with the Hamilton Conservatory for the Arts, the play's being performed there?
Yeah. Yeah, they have a black box space that they've kind of renovated in the last few years. Because they were using it like before the pandemic, but because of the pandemic, they had to obviously shut down. But now they are sort of trying to reopen it and are trying to want to promote its use within the theater community in Hamilton. But I think they're also they've also been looking for, partners that they can work with, that can sort of, that can tell stories, I think, that will fit in there with their mandate a bit better. And the Hamilton Conservatory of the Arts is very much youth focused, right? So they focus on dance, they focus on music, they focus on theater for children and for young people. So we were actually approached by Stephanie Hope Lawler. Stephanie she works at the conservatory as their theater director. But she was also in the production, the read through last year at the Hamilton Arts Week for Whale Fall. And in fact, she when before the pandemic, she was also part of another group at Aquarius, the Actors Forge, that had actually read a lot of the pieces that had been written by the people in the Junction. So she had actually was one of the first people to kind of take a look at the piece as it was emerging and read for the part of Becca. So she's been attached to the project from the beginning. So when she contacted myself and Aaron with Same Boat and saying, what are you guys doing for the Fringe? Would you be interested in doing this piece as a BYOV? We were like, oh yeah, that sounds great. We'd love to partner with the HCA. That's great. That's really exciting. It's an exciting way for us to kind of get back into making theater for Hamilton. We of course wanted to work with Stephanie. So yeah, it's turned into a really nice partnership and a nice collaboration that kind of took us all by surprise.
Now the Hamilton Fringe is, like many fringes this year, is back in person.
Yeah, I know. I think there is some digital stuff, but I think they're largely promoting it as back in person. Yeah.
Just I know for myself, navigating going back to the theater has been a little bit of a process. Some anxiety, some like checking, like what are the protocols that they're still following, all this sort of stuff. How do you feel as a presenter about going back into the theater?
Yeah, it is. It's all mixed emotions. It's all mixed emotions. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. Like, yeah, I honestly can't say it's. I mean, I'm excited for the chance to go back. I hope it doesn't get shut down again. I hope that all goes through. I know that the HCA will have some firm protocols in place. I assume that they'll still have masking and all that. I mean, COVID's not going away. I don't know. It frustrates me that the issue of masking indoors has become such a political issue. Like, I just don't get why that is. Like, there's no I mean, I wouldn't have an issue going into a theater wearing a mask. I don't know why anyone else would. I haven't been to see live theater yet, though, inside, like wearing a mask. I think the closest I came was in November. I went to see a movie, and it was weird. Like, there weren't a lot of people in the theater, so it didn't feel too risky, but it was a weird feeling. I'll be honest.
I've been noticing there seems to be like some real differences in at least in Ontario. When I look at Ontario and theaters, compared with, say, for example, theaters in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hearing a lot from people who are going to theaters in New York, and you see a lot of stuff where they are like adamant that mask stays on. The staff, the ushers are going around, make sure people keep their masks on, all of this stuff. And in Canada, we have some of our, at least in Ontario, some of the smaller theaters are like, yes, we're still masking, we're still doing this, we're still doing that. And some of the larger ones are like, we're recommending, which of course means that people probably won't. And it seems to me that to me, not requiring masks is disrespecting the performers as well as your fellow audience members. But the performers are going to be there every night. And we've already seen how many performers and how many people on stages and behind the scenes are getting COVID. Every performer puts their body and their well-being on the line during this pandemic. And the least you can do is wear a mask. And I just don't understand why in a lot of places here, we're being so cowardly about enforcing it.
It's a lack of political leadership. It's the same reason why mask mandates were removed in March. It's the same reason why capacity limitations were removed. It's a lack of political leadership. I'm going to just say it right here. It's the conservative government that we have that wants to close the book on COVID, that wants to project an image that the pandemic is over. It's catering to the same people who are anti-vaxxers. It's the same catering to the anti-maskers, the same bunch of yahoos that went and parked their trucks in Ottawa.
Yeah.
In February. I'm just going to say it. It's horrific. It's horrendous. And sadly, it's not a surprise from the Conservatives. It does surprise me that it's happening from, the chief medical officer. But again, this whole thing has been politicized, and it's really distressing. It's really upsetting. All of this is just to keep people safe. But I guess it's just the fact that people are complacent enough to dismiss it, because it's easier to dismiss it and walk away than have to have that extra level of care, which also is distressing, because one would think that, in the first year of this, all we were talking about was, well, we've got each other's backs and we're all in this together. 2 years later, well, it appears we're really not all in this together. It's every person for themselves. And that is disrespectful, and that's unfortunate. That said, I am seeing a lot of people who are wearing their masks in public. But the fact that it's not a firm policy with many places just speaks to me of political complacency and catering to the lowest common denominator, the lowest hanging fruit, just for political gain and votes.
Yeah, I can't argue with any of that. I feel like our conservative government in Ontario has decided that they just want to be the ones that quote unquote finished COVID, at least for this election.
I could go on and on about the election, but I won't, because that's a separate podcast.
That's a completely separate podcast. But I think that I really hope that the fringes, having been through so much of the, like, losing 2 years of fringe and performers, that there's an enforcement of the masking throughout, because especially for people who are touring, I can't imagine being in another city, finding out that they are not going to enforce masking, and then catching COVID when you have to either travel or decide not to.
Or that'd be a nightmare, right? Yeah, I don't get the sense. I'm not getting a signal from the fringe. I know the fringe here has been quite cautious and careful about maintaining safety. That said, they are managing to do some events in person. Like, I know they they had some workshops recently that were in person. I didn't attend them, but I mean, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But I mean, by and large, they've seemed to be very aware of the fact that this is still an issue, both for audiences and performers.
Yeah, and that's good. Now, as far as Hamilton Fringe goes, you have a history with the Fringe. You've done a number of shows with the Hamilton Fringe. Are you looking forward? I found my time at the Hamilton Fringe, it's a very warm fringe. There are warm fringes, there are indifferent fringes, and I found Hamilton to be a very warm fringe. Has that been your experience? And how long have you been doing stuff with the Hamilton Fringe?
God, I've been doing the Hamilton Fringe since I arrived in 2011. I arrived in 2010. 2010 was when I submitted a play to the new play contest for 2011 and won. So that was kind of my introduction to the Hamilton Fringe, was premiering my play as the winner of the new play contest. Interesting side note about Whale Fall. So I had submitted Whale Fall to the new play contest for this year. But here's how COVID kind of like the whole shutting down pandemic and the weird secluded life I've been living, for however many years. I submitted it like back in December, and I completely forgot that I had submitted it. So I was on my way, like, I guess it was in March. I was going off to pick up my kids at school, and Aaron texts me going, "Hey, you won the play contest." I'm like, "What? What do you mean I won the play contest?" And this is at the time when we were talking about doing the BYOV. Right. So I was thinking, oh, and I thought, of course, I'm like, oh, I won the new play contest. Well, I guess that's interesting. I guess, this play that I wrote, this actual well-made play that I wrote, I guess it won. But I'm doing Whale Fall as a BYOV. I guess the best I'll do is I'll just get tickets. I didn't remember that I had submitted Whale Fall as the new play contest. I thought I'd submitted this other play that I'd written. So when I got back, I was like, oh, Whale Fall won second place in the new play contest. Oh, I guess that's something I could use in marketing. Wow, what a great surprise. So yeah, Whale Fall, the play that we're doing at the BYOV, was one of the award winners of the new play contest, which is always a plus, because you're like, in Fringe, you're always like, what like are all the different angles I could use to promote it. But it was just so funny that I was like on my way and thinking, oh, well, okay. It was the other play that won second place. Big deal. Like, this is how tuned out I am of the whole circumstance.
Well, I think we can chalk a bit of that up to COVID brain, because we've all lost track of things. We're all distracted still.
Yeah, and I guess, like, just to speaking to your point of Fringe, of Hamilton Fringe, like it's kept on chugging along, right? Like, I know that other fringes have done this. I know Toronto was pretty active, but I would say, like, this year, like, one of the things I've really enjoyed about Hamilton Fringe was how sort of all the where all the different venues are. But I know that there may be some changes this year, to be quite honest, Phil. Like, I don't know which venues are still operating and which venues have been shut down. And that's actually just, unfortunately, a sad reality to our city and our community right now, that I know that some venues during the pandemic were shut down. I don't know if they're going to be coming back up. Like, a good example is the Staircase, right?
Right.
Like, during the past decade, the Staircase was like one of the destination BYOVs. I don't know if it's going to be there anymore. Like, the Staircase shut down at the beginning of the pandemic. Then it was brought back as like a restaurant movie theater, and then it shut down again. Apparently it's come back, but I don't know whether it's a BYOV. Like, I don't know. So what venues are open is a bit of an open question. So I'll be honest, I have no doubts about the sort of the warmth the emotional warmth and the spiritual warmth of the people in the Fringe right now in Hamilton. Like, I think people, there's a lot of artists here that are eager to get back, that are eager to connect with audiences. But what stages are going to be left for us to perform on is different. Because we're BYOV, I haven't seen what all the other actual official venues are. I don't know what they are.
I think the question of venues is one of those questions that has been a lot of artists have been asking throughout. Like, what is going to survive in Toronto? We are fortunate that the number of, say, independent spaces that are still in existence, but we did lose a bunch. So it's like, again, where's the support for those? Because the independent spaces don't have the profile of like some of the larger theaters. So they, in some cases, lost out and had to close.
Yeah, and I mean, we've had that happen as well. I think it's the question. I think it's the question we're coming out of. Ironically enough, it was the question we were going into with, but I think it's the biggest question now of, what sort of resources do we have at our disposal now? What does it take to get audiences out to see live theater?
Man, that's
right. The idea of a packed house for opening night. How does that make you feel?
I will tell you how that makes me feel.
I don't know about you, but it makes me kind of feel a bit nervous.
I will tell you exactly how I feel, because I remember watching a video, I guess, in the new year, just a few months ago, of like the production of Hadestown and its first performance back on Broadway, and it was a shoulder to shoulder. Packed house, and it was very celebratory, but my hands were kind of sweaty just like watching that, because I knew everybody was masked, but we've spent 2 years putting a distance between ourselves and other people. It's difficult to suddenly just sort of go, okay, let's all sit close together in a theater.
Yeah, it is tough. It's hard. And I don't. Emotionally, I don't know that I've been doing all that well with all of this. So how I feel about being shoulder to shoulder with all these different people, how I feel about being around people that I feel are being disrespectful, who, how many vaccines have you had? Are you an anti-masker? Are you an anti-vaxxer? How much do I trust my fellow human? Which is also sad, because I didn't really feel like that 2 years ago. So I don't know. I don't really have any ready answers. The only thing I can tell you is that I'm really glad that I'm returning. I'm getting back into some live theater work now with the team that I have. Aaron Joel Craig has been my longtime collaborator, right? I'm the playwright, he's the director dramaturg, and that's a relationship that we've fostered and cultivated over many, many years. So there's a really strong trust there, right? Like his voice when he talks to me about whatever is going on within the script or otherwise is always something that I can listen to. Stephanie is a performer that we wanted to work with for a long, long time. She's got her resume and pedigree is phenomenal, but just as a person, she's just really, really lovely, and just is another one of these people that I've actually kept in contact with over the course of the pandemic. Like, actually, when things first started locking down, she kind of took the initiative and said, "Hey, why don't we get together like every Wednesday night and read plays together over Zoom, just so that we can connect with each other." It didn't last very long, but it was still a nice thing. It was a very good thing to kind of keep us all grounded and together. And then the sort of the round who rounds out our cast, the sort of core working team, is a man named Raymond Lauder, and Ray was a teacher, was the head of the theater department at Redeemer College in Hamilton. Sadly, Redeemer shut its door, or shut down its theater department. I think it must have been last year. And there was much furor over that, much hand-wringing about what that meant, what the implications of that. But again, another one of these, either an ideological or a cost-saving measure that happened over the pandemic, to which the arts, were a direct culprit. But I've wanted to work with Ray for a long, long time. He has a really, really deep understanding and a deep love of theater, and really loves the piece and has been able to connect with it on a deep level. So it's a really fortunate, and it's a really big gift to be able to come back to theater with this piece, because it doesn't feel like, it's going to be a slog to get this up, right? It feels like this is a story we're going to tell. We're going to tell it to people at the HCA, and if they want to bring their kids, if they want to bring their young theater goers, they can, right? Like it's not like a hard piece like the piece that I did a few years ago about a radicalization of youths and terrorism overseas, which was a hard piece, and was difficult maybe to for some audiences to kind of take in. But this is, this is a piece that tackles climate change, but it also talks about the love between a parent and their child. And I think a lot of people can relate to that.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about writing, but also about being a geek. As somebody who has, you and I have both had experience playing role-playing games and been in comics. For you, were you writing before you were role-playing, or did role-playing lead to writing? Which came first?
Role-playing led to writing. No question.
What was your starting game of choice? Was it D&D or something else?
Oh, it was D&D. Of course it was D&D. It's always D&D. I always want to say, it's this other game, but it wasn't. It was D&D. It was the basic starter set. It was Keep of the Borderlands. It was the most basic thing. I think my first character was a thief. I can't remember his name. Elven thief, I believe. But yeah, it was D&D. But, I quickly graduated. I went on to other games. I went into all sorts of stuff. But it's funny, like the pandemic has kind of brought me back, although it like stopped me from role-playing, LARPing, right? Like live action role-playing. It's actually brought me back to tabletop, as in the virtual tabletop. So I play in a couple of games over the virtual table, over this server Discord, right? And I'm back to playing like one of my first loves in role playing, which is Star Trek. I'm playing a Star Trek role playing game, and it's so much fun.
Funnily enough, I did not start role playing with D&D. My first experience with D&D was terrible, and so I didn't role play until I started LARPing many years later.
Good Lord.
I know.
So what did you start with?
I started with Vampire the Masquerade. Was my first real role playing.
No,
I'm serious.
Started role playing with Vampire?
In live action role playing.
Wow.
The first time I did tabletop when I was in high school, this is like way back, I had a terrible
game. Okay.
And I played one game. And I hated it because he was just like very much like, you roll this, you go this many steps, and then we're going to fight a monster. And that was the entire thing.
Okay.
So it was not good. And I thought, if this is the game, I don't know what people are crazy about, I'm not playing this. And so it was only many years later that I found my way to live action role playing and then other games as well.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Well, that's interesting. Well, that's an interesting journey there.
But it's interesting also just to lead like the way that creating a story on the fly, both like as a game master or storyteller to have the plan, but the freedom and the need to be able to deviate from the plan.
Yeah.
And like there's a real improvisational, like storytelling on the fly can be very hard, but it's very rewarding. So it's a fascinating thing to think about taking that and taking that into playwriting and other writing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I didn't actually come to playwriting until many, many years later. I actually never thought of myself as a playwright until like after I was well done university.
Hmm.
Um, I, I, I think I was always creative writing, but I never thought, oh, I'll be a novelist or I'll be a short story writer. Um, and I think maybe that part of that came from role playing games because it was acting out. So I took a lot of drama, and I thought I wanted to be an actor. And then when I went to university at York, I went into the acting program and then promptly decided I don't want to just train to be an actor. So then I trained as a director dramaturg. And then when I got out of that, when I graduated that, I was like, yeah, I like the scene analysis and the scene construction and like the play construction, deconstruction that goes into being a director, like i.e. a dramaturg. But I hated the authority I thought I had to wield as a director. I got very uncomfortable with the status that I felt I needed as a director. And in fact, like for the next few years after that, when I was involved in directing projects, I never felt I did all that well as a director. In fact, I remember I directed you in a show, I don't know, somewhere in the 90s. And it was just, for me, it was not a project I felt good about because I felt, I've just fallen flat on my ass. It's not. And it was only after that experience that I went, well, what am I actually in this for? What am I actually in theater for? Like, I go to see a play, I go to see theater. And around that time I was going to see plays by, John Mighton, Jason Sherman, Judith Thompson, Michael Healy, like all of these creators were getting their start. And I was like, what is the magic for me in going to see a theater? Well, going to see theater. Do I envision myself being up there as an actor? Not really. Do I envision myself, being the director who has crafted and created that? I don't know that I am that either. But I am really excited to know like how that thing was put together and to put those stories together and put some of the weird stories in my head all together. And that's when I wrote my first play. Not surprisingly, my first play was like inspired by a role-playing game that I played. And that kind of dovetailed into a whole lot of plays that I've done that have sort of these geeky themes around them.
Now, that said, I think that I do think that genre is something that we don't explore much in theater.
No.
And there's a few companies that do and a few playwrights that do. And I'm always very impressed because, again, there was a time when that was like what you would see horror, you would see quote unquote sci-fi on the stage because that was where those stories were told. But we don't do that very much now. But I think it's like there's a lot of possibilities in that. So anytime I see that sort of thing happening, I'm always very, very impressed and happy.
Yeah. And I think, obviously theater can do things that I think can do things much better than other mediums can. That said, like, I don't know, there's so many avenues of storytelling nowadays that weren't really around, however many decades ago. Podcasting for one, like listening to podcasts basically are now audio dramas. And I know a lot of, I don't know, there seems to be a lot of adaptations that are coming from podcasts and also like regular, like standard plays, which over the pandemic were then turned into radio drama podcasts. I listened to those pretty religiously, and got as much out of them. So I don't know. It's again, this goes into my question of what I just have a lot of questions about what theater is going to look like now coming out of this. And if really, are we out of it? Like, I don't know if we're out of it, but what is it going to look like now coming out of the lockdown mode of this? Like, what types of things is theater going to talk about? What types of things are theater creators going to talk about? What things have we not talked about? What do audiences want to hear? Right? Like, it's a very big question. It's a very big question. Yeah. I don't have an answer.
No, and I don't think that we will have an answer for a couple of years, to be honest. I think that there will be that exploration to see, what does happen. And I'm sure that at fringes across North America, there's going to be at least one solo, this is how I spent my pandemic solo
Oh,
show or something.
I'm not looking forward to those.
To be honest, I'm not either, but I'm sure they're going to happen. But I think that is part of the process of
Part of the
figuring out
process, you're right.
how we tell these stories, right? And how we talk about this and where we are at. I think we're going to stumble a lot as we get through it. We're going to stumble and then we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I guess we can't really avoid it. Yeah.
As much as we might want to.
Yeah. Otherwise, we're just as guilty as everyone who's not paying attention to the issue.
Well, that's the thing.
It's over.
That's the thing. I think we will figure out how we talk about it and how, do I think that people, like, I don't think that people want to see the play that is like, this is what the pandemic was like. But I think that people will work through it as we allude to it in different ways, or maybe in a few years people will be able to sit down and enjoy a play or watch a play that is specifically about the pandemic. But I think that we will dance around it for a while before we figure out what it looks like.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Dancing around it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It's now, you said something that I found like I think is an important and enlightening question. The question about what you want to be in theater, what you wanted to do. Because I think, a lot of people when they start that road where you did, and I'm going to theater school and I'm going to be an actor. And then trying to figure out where you go from there, I remember being directed by you, and you were a good director. I want you to know that you were a good director.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
And
that means a lot. Actually, I got to be honest. I didn't feel I did very well.
I mean, this is the thing: is especially when we're
right.
This is the thing: is we don't know what those stumbling blocks are. We, especially early on, like I think that you were a good director. Your instincts were good, and I think you put on you put out a good product. But I think that the question that you were then asking is one that people don't often ask, because I think there's a fear of really investigating that, because we spend time in the theater. I know when I was in theater school way back in the ancient times, when I was in theater school, they were telling us a lot like, you only do the one thing. Just be an actor. Don't do anything else. Because if you do something else, do that. And there was the idea of being a multi-hyphenate, which so many people are now, was not an option.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's true. And I also feel like when I was in theater school, there was this sort of unspoken rule or unspoken expectation that you had to pursue career above all else, and that fueled the sort of the one trick pony argument, the siloing of it. You're in this discipline, you're in that discipline, which of course I think was also the same because that's how university programs are. If you went to post-secondary for an arts program, that's how you were sort of conditioned. Whereas some artists who didn't go through that have a different mindset. But I also feel like it's kind of the same thing. Like there was an expectation that because your career comes first, everything else has got to come second. And this is also something that I'm finding, with my life right now. I had kids relatively late in my career, but there was always this sense of, if you have kids, then you're not putting your career first, right? Or if you're working a regular job, then you're not putting your career first, right? It's just a hobby. And that's been something that's been a real difficulty with me, and something I've taken very great issue with, because this play wouldn't exist without my daughter, without my family. Like it just wouldn't. And in fact, the last play that I wrote about radicalization, that wouldn't happen without the birth of my son, without the awareness that that I've had a family, that I'm creating a family, and that there's tensions that are around that. There are anxieties around that as well as joy. And I guess for me, it just speaks to the way that, it's funny, you kind of talked about, I directed and I put out a good product. I know it's a turn of phrase, but for me, it kind of speaks to the way that I think we've commodified, is that right? Made into a commodity, theater, seen it as a commodity, right? Like, oh, are you creating a good experience or a good evening for audiences? Are they getting a good return on their investment? Right? Like so much of this, because I guess a lot of grants and so much money and funding comes from this sort of, what are you providing that will justify, this model of funding to be applied to? And I, I'm not saying that we're necessarily wrong as artists to think this. I just think that we've been conditioned to think this way, that this is how it looks to be a professional, right? And it's not. And I think, if anything, maybe the last few years, I'm seeing an awareness on a lot of artists' part, saying, you know what, I don't have to define success as this model that, perhaps this actor that I really idolized led their life as, right? Like, or I don't. I read a lot about theater artists who left the profession. And in fact, I am still kind of on the fence in many ways. I'm really not sure if this is really where I want to be, right? I started writing a book over the pandemic. I've written a couple of short stories. I've had a few of them published. Like, I don't know that now, having had the pandemic and so many questions about, what is it going to feel like in a shared space, in a shared theater space? Is this what I want to do? Right. And also, I mean, theater, the way theater worked as a business model wasn't working all that well beforehand. So, and I guess it just has had me sort of questioning, like, is this the place for me? Is this where I want to be? Because maybe it isn't. I can't answer. But I do know that there are certain things in my life that I don't really want to give up or sacrifice as much as I was readily willing to do beforehand, which was, I don't know that I want to sacrifice 4 days a week to going to rehearsal. Just don't know that I really care to do that. But I guess we'll see, right? Like, that's how I'm feeling right now. But again, I know an awful lot of people who said goodbye to this industry.
Well, I think people's relationships with theater had to change when if your relationship with theater and being an actor, being an artist in theater was that you wake up in the morning and you go from thing to thing to thing, and you were filling the day to make enough money to get going, and you're always going to this, that, and you're doing this, you're doing so many things, you never take a break and you never rest. And then when the theater shuts down,
yep,
what do you have?
What do you have?
And like, years ago, when I first took a day job and I went through a period of mourning my theater career or whatever, and decided and thinking, well, I'm taking a day job. I guess I'm not a theater professional anymore. I guess I'm not a theater maker. And then a few years later, trying to balance, like saying, no, wait, why does it have to be one or the other? Why can I not balance making theater when I want to with keeping a roof over my head without struggling? And I think that, and I hope that we can change after this, when people are thinking about what they want to do, is the idea that you must sacrifice every moment of every day, sacrifice your body, your soul, your mind on the altar of theater, and never take a break, never take a rest, never take a vacation until you can't do it anymore and you throw up your hands and you say, fuck it, I'm out. Or do you find a balance and actually, make theater on your terms and make the decision about how you want to see it done?
Well, it's interesting that you refer to the altar of theater. And of course, we both know, what one of the popular beginning of theater was, a religious experience, a religious gathering, right? At least in the Greek, if you look at it in the Greek terms. But I don't know. It just was an interesting image, giving up, in exchange for. I don't know. Yeah, I would like to think there's a balance, but at the same time, I mean, I'm not sure if it's balance or if it's saying, theater has a part in my life as but it has a part in my life that is no greater than wanting to raise my kids into worthwhile and lovely adults that will go on and make the world a better place, or is it any better than wanting to have a strong relationship with my spouse, or allowing them to pursue part of their career dreams, right? Like, so I don't know. I guess maybe for me, what I realized is that all those years of working, running was I don't know, in pursuit of something that maybe again wasn't real, was just a construct in my own mind about what does success mean. And I guess maybe that's it. How do you what is the definition of success? What does success look like? And I think maybe that's a constantly shifting, constantly changing image in our mind.
Well, maybe it should be.
It probably should.
And I think that I feel like we're at this point now where there's a rush to get back to exactly where we were in 2019.
Yeah.
Let's fill those houses. Let's get those things on their feet. Let's do this. But I don't think we've really taken a look at the fact that for a lot of people, their relationship to the industry has changed over these 2 years. And then maybe the way that we operate and the way that what we expect from our artists and our producers and everybody else also needs to change. And that it can't be exactly what it was. We need to find out how do we balance? How do we find work-life balance in the theater, and can we do it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Maybe I'm naive to think it can happen. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I think we're going to, I thought there was going to be a reckoning when, all of this shut down.
Yeah.
I don't know that I see it coming yet. So
yeah,
I guess we'll see.
I don't know.
Maybe it'll all bounce back. Who knows?
I think I was sort of expecting the same reckoning. And I think that, there were promises made in 2020 that I think are quickly being fulfilled.
There were a lot of promises made in 2020. Yes. You're right, and some of them were fulfilled. Some of them I'm still waiting for.
I think that's the thing.
Some of them I think a lot of other people are still waiting for.
That's exactly the thing, and I think that at some point we need to go back and look at those promises that were made and start asking questions about when those promises are going to be fulfilled.
Which I guess, is kind of a nice dovetail to the subject of this play, yes. Because actually part of what this play is kind of a recognition on the part of the main character, Becca, my daughter, that promises made about the world, about the type of world that she wanted to grow up in and the kind of world that she was expecting did not happen. And I think for me, that actually was a big part of why I wrote the play. Is, what kind of world are we leaving for our kids, right? Like this disposable world that we can just kind of say, well, we'll leave. I'm not even thinking about going. I'm not even thinking about my own death, right? I'll just live forever and I'll use up all the resources as much as I like, and I'll leave them to worry about. Well, this play actually deals spot on with that. Like I as a playwright had to confront the issue of my own mortality in writing this, because I was writing myself as a character in this play, right? I'm writing my daughter as a young woman in this play. I'm writing about, what happens as we get older, what happens as the two of us argue, what happens as, it's speculative, right? Mm-hmm. But it was a painful thing having to write, well, what would an argument between myself and my daughter when I'm older and she's older, what would that sound like? What would we argue about? Right. And all of a sudden, the typical argument between a young person and an adult that I was writing in plays, when I was first started writing plays like 25 years ago. I'm writing it about me, my family. That's kind of screwed up. But a lot of it, again, is a lot of, it's a really good point. The idea of promises made and promises broken. Right? What things did I not, what things did I withhold from my daughter about what was happening in the world? Right? There's a theme about that. There's one of the character, Becca, says, were you not telling this to kind of shelter me from the truth? Right? I could have handled it. Right? I could have handled it and we could have talked about it together. And I think that's a big theme is the danger of withholding truth for fear that it's going to be too painful, has been a big issue, right? Like, and the pandemic has kind of hammered that home for me, right? Like you want to keep your children safe. You want to have them not deal with the issues, but I'll go back to masks, the issue of masks. So many people that I've seen argue against masks in school, masks on children are like, oh, it's just so terrible for children to wear masks. They hate them and it destroys them. And I'm like, well, actually it doesn't. My kids we taught them the importance of it and they don't have an issue with it because they know how important it is. So it's just another piece of clothing. Right. And it's because we had that dialogue with them, right? It's because we didn't withhold there's something going on, but we're not going to talk about what's going on. Well, we can't really not tell you what's going on because all the schools are closed, all the businesses are closed, all the world is shut down, right? And it's interesting. One of the things that kind of came out of the pandemic shutting down, because my daughter and I would watch nature shows, and that was a big informing part of the play as well, right? This thing of the two of us watching nature shows. But because the world kind of locked down, a lot of animal populations bounced back, particularly whales and sharks. But then the whole question is, well, now that we're getting going and moving again, what's going to happen to all those lives that kind of bounced back? How are they going to be affected again? Right? Like the issue of shipping traffic, for instance, was a big thing, right? Off the coast in BC, right? Shipping was kind of halted. So orca migrating in the Salish Sea in the Georgia Strait, there was a lot more of them, right? Because with no boats, the seas were quieter, so they could talk to each other, they could hear each other much better. But now, the boats are out, people are out again and moving and making noise. And, now that one of the recent reports I've read is that they don't know where the orca have gone. They're not in the Georgia Strait right now. So where have they gone? And so I really frighteningly feel that's kind of prescient. Like that's something I directly talk about in the script. So yeah, I don't want to say that this play is forecasting the future, but it's more of a cautionary tale. I like to call it a climate change fable.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's what it is. It's a fairy tale. It's a fable. And I think the best fables are cautionary fables. Ones that kind of give us pause to think about what's actually happening.
I think that's a good place to end right there. Thank you so much, Stephen, for this conversation.
Oh, thank you. It's my genuine pleasure.